G'day folks, ZiggyD here, with a big news and discussion video on last Epoch. If you've missed me, I've been away on paternity leave, spending some really amazing time with my new baby daughter Talina and my partner Amy. Tully's really awesome, and this has been a really special time, so thanks for all the support over the years that have let me be able to take this time and come back when I felt ready. I'll be easing myself back into content creation over time as I feel out how to organise myself in this exciting and different new chapter of my life. So anyway, back on topic. A while back, last Epoch announced that they would not be having any trade at all, scrapping their previously planned bazaar system. Instead, they would just have a simple system of gifting items, allowing you to give party members items that dropped, so long as they were present when the item dropped. They had a lot of solid and pretty agreeable reasons, really, for going this route, like wanting to have an extremely satisfying item progression, with nice drop rates, good target farming options, and powerful crafting. I agreed with pretty much all of their reasoning, but I was still a little disappointed because I really wanted to see how last Epoch would approach implementing trade while still managing to preserve good solo item progression. Is it even possible to have trade without it completely destroying a game's progression curve? Well, debates on trade can get pretty heated, as a good number of players really enjoy trading, and a vibrant trade system is a huge part of an online game actually feeling online and fostering competition. However, many players rightfully feel that trade has always heavily circumvented or even destroyed item progression in action RPGs. True to form, EHG are trying to do something new with last Epoch now, as they're adding trade to the game with a unique and brand new system, hoping to do the impossible, balancing the power of trade while making not using it a viable alternative, and trying to not destroy the generous item progression the game is becoming known for. So let's explore this new system and debate how close it might come to achieving these pretty lofty goals. First, however, it's worth noting that the party member item gifting is sticking around, and it will play a role regardless of how you engage with the new systems. It's also been made better overall. Previously, let's say, little Timmy and Billy nearly always play together. Billy is offline one night, and Timmy finds an amazing item for Billy's build. Timmy and Billy both cry, as they cannot gift the item as they weren't both present when the item dropped. Pretty sad. This has been solved with a new resonances system. Play together a lot and you'll get resonances that you can smush into an item to allow you to gift it with the listed player. Sounds like a really good solution for friends or partners or anything that tend to play together a lot. So if you were just planning on playing last Epoch with a couple of friends and aren't interested in trading with the online community, your experience should only be getting better, but more on that later. So what is the item faction system? In last Epoch, there will be two new factions, the Merchants Guild and the Circle of Fortune. The Merchants Guild, or MG, allows players to trade items with other players in the Merchants Guild. At first, just basic items, but as the player gains reputation and favour with the Merchants Guild, higher ranks will allow for the buying and selling of more powerful items, including uniques and even legendaries at higher ranks. The Merchants Guild allows players to trade directly or even using the bazaar system, which will allow you to trade asynchronously and instantly, that is, without the other player being there. Climbing the ranks of the Merchants Guild will allow you to buy, sell and equip more powerful items and do so with cheaper favour fees. The Merchants Guild is trade mode, and aligning with them is accepting worse drops and crafting as a trade-off for gaining access to the highly deterministic power of trade. The other guild competing for the player's allegiance is the Circle of Fortune, or COF. The COF improves quantity and quality of drops, provides some crafting benefits, and gives access to bounties targeting specific item types for more deterministic farming options. Gaining ranks with the COF will mean that you get benefits like a higher drop rate of exalted affixes and see more legendary potential on unique items. The Circle of Fortune is the self-found mode, and choosing them means you give up the option of trade entirely in exchange for better drops and crafting and the bounty system for more target farming potential. Now do note that I said self-found and not solo self-found. Circle of Fortune players can still group with each other, and even Merchants Guild players, and everyone can still use the party item gifting system with some cross-guild limitations. So let's talk about switching between trade, the Merchants Guild, and self-found, the Circle of Fortune. So a character can freely swap between the two guilds. They're not entirely separate modes, like say Path of Exile's different leagues. However, all gear is tagged either Merchant's Guild or Circle of Fortune on drop. You can only use Merchant's Guild gear, for example, if you have enough ranks in the Merchant's Guild, and the same goes for the COF gear. This means that if you want to swap guilds, you must acquire a new set of gear in the faction that you're swapping to for your character. So this will mean getting some of the new guild stamped gear from another player, gambling, buying from the vendor, or just crafting some basic items and going from there. Now this will be a pretty significant setback depending on how far along your endgame gear is. I think that players will mostly stick with whatever they have chosen for that character. Not only because of the hurdle of re-gearing and the time taken to rank up the other guild potentially, but also because players will mostly pick the choice that aligns with how they like to play, and that doesn't tend to change too much over time. Rarely within the scope of a character, I'd say. That said, I'm sure there will be some strategies where people farm for things like crafting materials in COF, while they have other characters aimed at making gold through trade. Do keep in mind that gold and crafting materials will be shared, and these things don't get stamped with guild marks. I'll be interested in how high-end players approach the system in a competitive play, for example. Will they just stick with trade, or will everyone kind of like mutually agree to COF so that they're not like selling things to each other if they're competing against each other in races and whatnot? It'll be pretty interesting to see how it plays out. So the way I see it, with this system, EHG is trying to achieve two distinct things. The first is heavily limiting trade so that it can be added to the game without damaging item progression too much for players that want to use it, or, even worse, warping the game for players who don't even use it. The second is creating a set of benefits for non-trading players to bridge some of the gap between trade and non-trade, primarily to make non-trade players feel like they aren't getting a worse system overall. Now, implemented well, ideally EHG can strike the balance where trade feels good, but not mandatory, and non-trade players feel better off even if trade is still technically the most efficient way to progress. Now, one of the most important factors in controlling how much trade impacts item progression is what sort of limitations it has. An efficient and asynchronous trade system where you can easily find and buy any item you want will mean that trading is always the best way to get any specific item you need. And that means your item acquisition process will always revolve around how do you get as much gold per hour as possible. Everything essentially becomes a gold per hour calculation, whether you are literally farming gold drops or items or other ways to make gold by selling. Effectively, you will end up measuring even items in gold per hour based on how much they sell for. Long-term result of this is that even builds start to get measured in gold per hour. It's pretty easy to see this sort of thing take effect in YouTube guides. Now, honestly, this can be pretty fun in its own right, and tons of players enjoy maximizing, for example, how many chaos per hour they can make in Path of Exile so that they can buy expensive chase items. However, you do tend to lose some things. For example, why would you do a variety of content chasing tabled loot drops and taking advantage of different target farming options or different dungeons when you could instead just do the one thing that gives you the most gold per hour? Everything else can eventually become irrelevant. So, content can become much more limited if trade is unlimited. So let's take a look at how EHG is approaching limiting trade in Last Epoch to see how they are preventing this from becoming too much of a thing. So, firstly, Merchant's Guild items can only be used by Merchant's Guild players. That's a big thing. You can't buy something in trade mode and then switch to Circle of Fortune and then use that really powerful item that you obtained easily through trade on that self-found character. It doesn't work. You need the gears are completely separate. Next up, you cannot trade crafting materials like glyphs and shards, and you can't trade dungeon or arena keys either. Now, it's worth mentioning that you could, in theory, buy items, like magic items or rare items that have affixes you want, and then shatter them to get those affix shards, and that may end up being a thing for certain chase affixes potentially. But for the most part, your bulk of your crafting materials, you just simply can't get from trade, you have to earn those yourself. Another limitation is that you cannot trade items for items. This heads off any potential intermediary trade thing where a certain item becomes a certain staple for trades, like for example runes or Stone of Jordans from Diablo 2. The way that it works is that at the bazaar, one player puts up an item for sale and the other player spends gold to purchase it. There's no real way around that. The same thing is true of direct player-to-player trading. However, there will kind of be a likely workaround for this. A pair of players could, in theory, make an item trade for 1 gold, and then the second item trade the other way for 1 gold as well. The drawback here is that direct trades also cost favor, There's this favor tax that's applied. So 2 separate trades will cost twice as much of that, and that might be some form of limitation depending on how much favor is available. It probably means that some really high-end trades where neither player is interested in gold, but 2 people have very high-end rare items might do some item-to-item trades, possibly, but I imagine the bulk of things will take place in gold trades, as there's an advantage for a medium of exchange like gold. It's much easier. Another limitation is that you cannot drop trade to circumvent any of this. Loot is instanced still, and other players cannot see things you drop on the ground. You have to use direct trade, the gifting system, or the bazaar to acquire items from other people. Another thing is that exactly what items you can trade is based on your Merchant's Guild rank. So this starts with only normal, magic, and rare items being available for trade, but you unlock everything else like idols, uniques, and even legendary items as you rank up. Crafting materials and keys are always untradeable though, as mentioned before. That said, once again, you could buy rare or magic items with the intention of shattering them for affix shards. Now, you can only use Merchant's Guild items if you have a high enough rank in the Merchant's Guild. This mostly aligns to the rank required to buy and sell them, so at first rank, with rank 1, you can only trade and equip normal, magic, and rare items from the Merchant's Guild. And you need to get to rank 2 to buy and equip set items. The effect of this is that you cannot swap from Circle of Fortune to the Merchant's Guild after farming a lot of gold and instantly buy the best possible items. You will still have to spend some time working your way up through the Merchant's Guild once you do so to be able to equip those higher end items. And this just adds a little bit of like a you can't quite fully gear out your character instantly sort of wall. The biggest and most long-term impactful restriction, however, is, in my opinion, once an item has been traded, it cannot be traded again. It becomes account bound. This removes items from the economy permanently and at an extreme rate. It's a bigger item sink, I think, than even hardcore permadeath normally is, as some characters survive hardcore, but no items survive trade in Last Epoch. In most action RPGs, you can buy a very powerful and expensive item, and then resell it for a similar amount in the future, or even a profit in some cases when you make your next character or change builds. Theoretically, the amount of items in the economy is always going up. That's a big part of why games like Path of Exile and Diablo 2 have seasons to periodically refresh and go back to square one. However, here, with the fact that you cannot retrade items, there's a perpetual item sink. This also does a lot to prevent flipping and things like that as well, which I'll talk more about later. The other really important limitation here is that buying and selling items have a favor tax. A gold tax is the more typical approach for systems like this and can be quite effective. Gold taxes create price pressure and remove some gold from the economy, acting as a gold sink, which can be a good thing. However, Last Epoch's current gold sink situation is pretty good, as there's some dungeons that can really chew through large amounts of gold. It's pretty easy to spend your gold in the game currently. However, a gold tax is effectively paid for with your trading profits. As such, it doesn't effectively limit trade in such a potent way as what EHG have planned with a favor tax. Or at least the way the limitation is applied is not based on how much game content you're playing necessarily. Because, again, you can pay the tax with gold, which can be earned through trade itself. So, favor is earned through gameplay, and it means that to buy and sell, you must play and earn favor. You cannot simply sell items to gain favor to fund the further selling of items. Trading will be limited by how much favor you earn. The exact balance of this, of course, will depend on how much favor players can practically earn versus how much favor it costs to buy or sell, alongside the bottlenecks of how many sellable items you produce versus how much gold you make to buy other people's items and so on. There's a lot to explore and probably fine-tune here. So on the concept of balancing loot around trade and self-found, EHG has stated that the baseline for loot acquisition will be nerfed somewhat alongside the implementation of the new item faction system. This is because both offer powerful improvements to item acquisition, which means a dramatic increase in player power. The goal, however, seems to be to make it so that a few ranks in Circle of Fates would leave players in a similar position or better off compared to how they were prior to the item faction system. Comparatively, players in the Merchant's Guild, trade mode, will be finding less stuff than they are now, the trade-off for the power of trade. It is unfortunate, but this nerf is effectively opt-in, and it doesn't touch the players who don't want to trade at all, which is a pretty nice outcome here. So, how do I feel about EHG's plans for this new trade system? Now first, let's evaluate it against the goal of adding trade and limiting it in a way that will allow it to be a positive experience for people wanting to trade without warping item progression too much. I don't think it's possible to implement enjoyable trade that doesn't have a large impact on item progression, nor should that really be the goal. What makes trade feel good as a buyer is that you find something that's really good for your character and feels like a notable step up in power, so that your efforts in getting the gold to buy that item feel rewarded. As a seller, you want to be able to successfully sell a good item that you don't actually need or want, and then feel like you got a really good boost to your wealth by doing so. So the goal should be to implement as many and as strict limitations as possible that you can get away with, while still feeling like those things are true, that trade still feels good with those limitations. Now what's exciting about what we're seeing here is that the limitations EHG are using are quite severe, I think. In particular, ensuring items can only ever be traded once and the favor taxes. However, the limitations are on the items, the amount you can trade, and what you can trade and when. The limitations aren't being created through friction in the trade process itself. That is to say, you're not limited in your trading by who is online or who responds to your messages or other awkward inefficiencies, because the trade is asynchronous through the bazaar. If the process of buying or selling an item is frictionless and pain-free, then I think there's a strong chance the experience will feel rewarding, even if what you can actually trade and how many trades you can make is severely limited. Expectations here of the player play a huge role here, I think. If you know that you can only buy or sell items of a certain type currently, or that you can only do it every so often, then your expectations adjust to that reality, so long as there are no unexpected surprises in the process. That's what really gets you. Like someone not responding to your trade request, even though you can see them and their item is right there. Why aren't they responding? When there's an unexpected gap between your expectations and reality, that's when problems start to arise and people get really frustrated with the trading experience. Another huge and interesting effect of EHG's plans, in particular the fact that items can only be traded once, is that flipping and playing the market is completely removed. Now, this is a bummer for the people that do enjoy playing trade sim and flipping items as their primary wealth generator, but this is a pretty small number of players. The upside is that there is very little room for price fixing and other forms of market manipulation here. No one can buy up all the exsanguinous from the market and list them at a higher price. If they do so, they'll simply be stuck with the item and unable to trade them. Now, there's some pretty key balancing points that we don't know yet, obviously, like how much favor do we get and how many trades does that allow in X amount of time. This could range from a few trades a day to many trades per hour. Also, how many bazaar trade slots are available as a seller? Are the slots done per item type, or are they shared across all item types, for example? This sort of thing impacts what type of items are being sold in a pretty big way. For example, very limited sell slots means that only the most valuable items a seller owned will be listed because you just don't have space to list the cheap stuff. So there's much less starter or budget items available in the economy. Conversely, a very large amount of slots means that there's a huge flood of budget items as people just throw up whatever they find in the trade market. This sort of thing can drive the value of those sorts of lower end items to the ground, making it feel not very worthwhile to sell them. That can make it harder for a player who's starting later or a newer player to get a little bit of a foothold in the economy. The good thing is that these sorts of questions are all about numerical balancing decisions, which are pretty easy to fine tune over time until they get to a good place. It's also pretty hard to set these things correctly ahead of time. There's always going to be some sort of feeling it out with this sort of stuff. The more hard feature decisions though, like not being able to trade items more than once, for example, all sound like very promising ideas to me. And on the whole, I'm very excited to see how trading pans out. Now, the second thing to evaluate was how well things feel balanced between trade and non-trade. I think it's probably not actually going to be possible to balance these two factions or play styles. It's quite likely that trade will always be the most powerful way to play overall. It's just really hard to compare. On one side, you go to deterministically farm a key unique for your build from a boss that you know drops it, and you've even got a huge boost to your chances from Circle of Fortune, and maybe you get it in a couple runs with moderate stat rolls. On the trade side of things, however, you go to the bazaar, walk to the right table and buy it within a minute. Sure, you have had to get the gold, but you've been stockpiling that while you've been doing other things. Trade is just nearly always going to be the more efficient option, even when with all the planned restrictions in place, for getting a specific item. But that's okay, I actually don't think perfect balance needs to be pursued. And if it were eventually, the result would be that trade becomes pointless, and then you've gone full circle and unimplemented trade in a really weird way. What you actually want to achieve here is that both traders and non-traders feel like they're better off in some way. You achieve this by making sure that both options feel rewarding in their own right, and that each side has something they are better at. From the little we've seen already of the Circle of Fortune, I think there's a strong chance that this will be the case. We already know that trade will be the best and fastest way to get a certain specific item, perfect for those builds that need several key uniques to function, for example. But Circle of Fortune looks like it'll offer a much better crafting experience, both with direct buffs to crafting, but also more exalted affixes dropping and more legendary potential on average. What's really cool is those strengths align perfectly to what self-found players really tend to enjoy. A scattershot kind of progression, where you find something cool that inspires you to make a new build, or take your existing build in a new direction. Circle of Fortune players will more often get that legendary potential unique that they didn't expect, that will get them excited for their next build. And that's a huge strength in this system. I think the idea that trade players are punished a little tiny bit with worse drops for being dirty cheaters, traders, will probably help reassure COF players that they've chosen the right guild as well, regardless of how true it actually is. It's all about perception in the end, that's what this all comes down to. Same as with Merchant's Guild, there's some things we just don't know much about the balance as yet for Circle of Fortune, self-found, like how the bounties work and how much of an impact they have on dropping specific item types. Will Circle of Fortune players be twice as likely as a Merchant's Guild player to find a specific item themselves? Similarly though, these are the things that are very tunable later, and overall the self-found experience here looks very promising. Honestly, Last Epoch already boasts a very rewarding self-found experience, and it seems like that's only getting better with the faction system. I think the best assessment of how I'm feeling here and for how promising this item faction feels on the whole is just that honestly I'm really torn on which guild I actually want to play with, which is a surprise because I usually lean 90% towards trade. I love trade. But this actually looks like it's going to be a tough choice. Good thing we can play a mix with different characters or even swap. That's great. I think the biggest weakness or difficulty here of this system is that it's a pretty complicated solution. There's a lot of moving parts here, and it's going to take them a long time to get it fine-tuned right, especially because multiplayer is releasing pretty late in the cycle of development for this game, and then this is releasing even later. So it's going to be something that's not necessarily going to feel quite right at launch, I think. It'll be impressive if it feels really good at launch. But there is very solid long-term potential here, though. And like I mentioned, most of the aspects that seem like they'll need tuning are like numerical things that are fairly easy to adjust. You know, how much favor does it cost to make trades, that sort of thing. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this mega ramble. I get like this when I find something super interesting, and EHD have been doing this more and more with some of their decisions regarding Last Epoch. If you enjoyed this ramble and my other content over the years, then I've recently enabled the cheapest possible channel membership here on YouTube. So you now have the option of giving me $1 for basically nothing special in return, except the knowledge that you've helped support me and my recently grown family. I do appreciate it. That's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.